illegal trade in wine, including poaching, presents significant challenges and threats to the environment, including undermining the potential benefits arising from legal trade that contributes significantly to socio-economic upliftment and development.
Since 1973, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species has aimed to ensure that global trade in wildlife is sustainable and does not threaten species survival. But illegal poaching has become endemic, particularly that of Africa's elephants and rhinos, highlighting the need for renewed cooperation in regulating legalized trade in wildlife. And with that in mind, the CITES conference in South Africa this week generated robust debate on the international ban on ivory trade. But then, why do some African countries still want the ban lifted? And what more can be done to stem the ivory trade in Africa? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, CITES is the largest global gathering of people focused on wildlife trade, attracting intergovernmental, international and national organizations, along with the private sector and experts from multiple disciplines. It remains one of the world's most powerful tools for wildlife conservation through the regulation of trade. And South Africa is the first African country to host the event since 2000. Well, CCTV spoke to South African Minister of Environmental Affairs, Edna Molewa, about the country's expectations of the conference.
We do think that CITES is going to be a very exciting meeting, the biggest ever that has actually happened. Very interesting topics put there. And we do think that South Africa will really once again prevail and have parties agreeing in certain positions and various positions that they have actually proposed, and this will be a good outcome, we believe. As South Africans, certainly will be showcasing majority of our success stories. One of them is how we've been dealing with rhino even under the attack where we are. Well, first of all, the fact that South Africa is the country in the world that has got the highest number of rhino. This is a conservation success story on its own. So because we are under attack, we have actually now started fighting, and in this fight we're also succeeding. So there will be external activities where we'll be showcasing this and really saying to people this is the way to go, and sharing. Also, by the way, learning from other people, because we're not just going to be giving and just telling people of what we're doing, but learning from other people as well. We do need China right at the helm of things so that we can, first of all, continue to work together to dispel these myths that are existing right now that people actually allege that lead to rhino horn being poached. And therefore, in that working together, we can reach out to the massive number of people out there working together. We have signed an MOU with China. We have actually agreed on using technology and developing technology together of tracking devices and all those things that we actually have to work together on. Reduction management in its entirety, that's why we're looking forward to working with our counterparts in China.
One of the major topics under discussion is poaching and the illegal ivory trade. For the last 9 years, CITES parties have been negotiating a decision-making mechanism which would establish a process for a future trade in ivory. And this week, the parties at CITES voted to end the long-running discussion. China has also been lauded for its efforts in combating illegal wildlife trafficking, and CCTV's Yolisa Njamela has more.
The plight of the elephant has already generated fierce debates here. Elephant populations in Africa have declined by around 111,000 over the past decade. Traffic, the network that monitors the illegal wildlife trade, says some countries' efforts to combat the crime are paying off. In particular, Chinese President Xi Jinping's 2015 decision to impose a near-complete ban on ivory imports and trade.
Significant progress has been achieved since that announcement. The State Forestry Administration has temporarily suspended ivory carving imports from African countries, including trophy hunting. We're encouraged by the many significant actions China has taken to combat illegal wildlife trade.
China has taken several steps to clamp down on domestic demand for ivory. As a result, according to Traffic, trade in illegal wildlife products is decreasing.
China strengthens supervision and law enforcement of endangered species. China has been banning wildlife trade, use of rhino horns and tiger bones. It has also suspended ivory imports and destroyed ivory products confiscated during law enforcement. China launched intersection collaboration mechanism on CITES implementation and enforcement, organized targeted law enforcement actions which dealt a heavy blow to illegal and criminal activities including poaching, transporting, business on and trafficking.
CITES General Secretary John Scanlon has praised China for its efforts, but says it and other member nations still have a long way to go.
We all have a lot more to do, but the commitment and the number of initiatives that have been taken over the last 6 years have been extraordinary in the fight against illegal wildlife trade and in terms of working towards putting legal trade on a sustainable footing.
CITES research shows that the population of the African elephant is at its lowest in 25 years. Yulisa Njomela, CCTV, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, to get a better understanding of the feeling on the ground in the struggle to safeguard Africa's elephants, in Zambia, a conservation group is battling to protect their population from both poachers and human-wildlife conflict. CCTV's Clementine Logan was recently in Zambia to find out more.
One of Africa's most iconic species, and one of its most endangered. A conservation group is hoping to change that. For the past 22 years, Conservation Lower Zambezi has helped train and support scouts here in Zambia. They scour 9,000 square kilometres of the country's Lower Zambezi National Park and game management areas. This is the team's newest recruit. Dogs are being taught how to detect ivory, arms and bushmeat.
With the help of the dogs, there's no more much time. We can still know, find that person and find the ivory very quickly. These dogs, they will help a lot in this conservation unit. I'm sure they will help us in not only me, but the entire Zambia will benefit from these dogs.
Poaching in Zambia has soared over the past 2 years. The team needs more resources to take on powerful syndicates.
Poaching becomes more and more sophisticated, the types of weapons they're using, the types of communications they've got, big international syndicates and poaching rings, etc. So it's done on a much more sort of regional and continental scale now, or global scale, than it was in the past. So we're having to rely more and more on sort of specialized units. Recent surveys, they're showing that the population is holding its own, but we need to keep this pressure up on the poachers.
The involvement of the local community is critical to Conservation Lower Zambezi, whether it's training up foot scouts and dog handlers or helping mitigate human-wildlife conflict in surrounding villages. As farming encroaches on wildlife corridors, elephants face threats from villagers trying to protect their crops.
We depend on these gardens for our survival. The community buys vegetables from us, but the elephants come and eat them, which impacts on our income. Sometimes we don't even have enough money to send our children to school. People have been attacked, some have died.
We as Conservation Lower Zambezi, in conjunction with National Parks and Wildlife, we bring in our scouts. They help in this area up to the harvest time. They come in to scare the elephants away. But also that one is not enough because of lack of manpower. We are actually getting a lot of help from the NGOs other than the government itself. They must do more because this is not just into crops but also into injuries and death.
Tourism is a huge financial boost to conservation efforts. Lodges pay membership fees and raise revenue for the park. They also provide jobs for residents, and many guides double up as conservationists.
Since 2008, they've introduced the system of trying to help the local people, that is in terms of employment, that is by training guides. And there's also a program where they only not train guides to become guides, but of course ambassadors to conservation in Zambia. And they also help educate children, that is to teach them the importance of conservation.
The last aerial survey showed there are around 23,000 elephants in the Lower Zambezi. It's a fairly large number, but conservationists say it would be unwise to take for granted that the population can withstand threats without help. Clementine Logan, CCTV in the Lower Zambezi.
We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, my expert guests will help examine the steps needed in Africa to stem the ivory trade. Stay with us.
What we need is Appendix 1. We need a total ban on all trade in ivory. We need all of the lions on Appendix 1. We need all of the rhinos protected. We mustn't have any downlisting. This is now these species, they are looking extinction in the face, and it's our fault.
They're looking extinction in the face, and it's our fault. That was the president of Animal Defenders International, Jan Creamer, speaking on the sidelines of the CITES conference in Johannesburg, South Africa earlier this week. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, to help further unpack the decisions taken at CITES in relation to the ivory trade, I have expert guest standing by in Johannesburg, Dr. Philip Murudi. He's the Vice President for Species Protection at the Africa Wildlife Foundation. And in Beijing, current affairs commentator Victor Gao. To you both, thank you for joining us in this discussion. Dr. Murudi, you're in Johannesburg at the CITES conference. I'll start off with you here. Concern about African elephants and a global ivory trade are some of the key issues there at the CITES conference. Just give us a clearer indication of what the delegates and the participants there are thinking in relation to these two issues.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Beatrice. Certainly elephants and ivory trade are one of the key issues will be discussed and being discussed here at the CITES Conference of Parties in Johannesburg. The main thing is that elephants have suffered. The populations have gone down, plummeted dramatically since 2007. So we are in a poaching crisis, and associated with this is the idea that poaching is driven by demand for ivory. So trade in ivory directly associated with the poaching crisis that we are in at the moment. That is the issue being discussed here. As you know, a proposal, one from Namibia, another from Zimbabwe, to ask that their annotation to the Appendix 2 listing of the elephant populations in those countries be removed, opens the door for further trade in ivory.
Right, there are those who will say that's not correct, and there are those who will say, no, this is correct. What is the thinking, though, behind Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa's push for that direct mechanism discussion to continue?
Well, the argument is that the money that will come from sale of ivory will be used to support conservation and community development. But we say that the African Wildlife Foundation, particularly, we are not in favor of such a proposal, particularly at this time when the elephant is endangered by increased poaching. We have seen almost local extinctions. We have seen decline of some populations, like in the forest elephant, by over 60% in the last, about 20 years, and very recent declines in southern Tanzania, again showing that the elephant is really in trouble. About 30,000 elephants are killed each year to provide ivory for this illegal market. And so we don't feel it is appropriate at this time when you have a crisis to really introduce trade. We are asking that the trade in ivory trade be shut. No markets for ivory trade to be open at this moment.
I want to get your view here, though, Victor, from an international perspective, though, in terms of the global ivory trade and shutting down those markets completely. What is the thinking coming out of China in this respect?
It is a very unfortunate thing that poaching for ivory still happens in the world of today, and thousands of elephants are actually killed for their tusks. In China, traditionally, there has been a demand for ivory, mostly for carving of ivory into artistic objects. In recent years, the Chinese government has taken firm actions to outlaw the import and the production of ivory products and the buying and selling of ivory products in China. And this has taken a lot out of the demand for ivory products. But this is not sufficient enough, mainly because illegal trading of ivory, especially smuggling of ivory products into China, including whole tusks of elephants into China for reprocessing, still happen. And this also is a large part of the global illegal demand for ivory products. Therefore, I think China needs to do whatever we can do to tighten up the control of the ivory imports, which is declared illegal, and also go to the hilt in bringing a full stop to the buying and selling of ivory products.
Right.
This is an absolute necessity in this struggle.
Dr. Murudi, poaching though and the ivory trade itself, those are not new issues being discussed now at the CITES. What exactly is emerging now? What is the new discourse that is emerging out of CITES in regards to these two issues?
Actually, the main proposals will be discussed starting Monday in Committee 1. But obviously, there are two sides to this issue, but what we advocate is one African voice for the African elephant herd to make sure that what is done in one population, in one country, does not impact other countries negatively. And we know this is what is happening. There is no one who is safe from poaching. Poaching will spread, and therefore what we advocate and what we see coming out of the CITES Conference of Parties is a common African voice saying, let us save the species. The declines we are seeing now are unsustainable, and unless concerted effort is taken, concerted and ambiguous messages are sent to the world to stop this trade, the elephant will be endangered. But yeah, the main debate has not been put on plenary. But yeah, I do expect that it will be a tough debate, but what I have stated, a consensus will be arrived at for the sake of the elephant.
Right. Victor Gao, are there any education programs and initiatives started by the Chinese government, though, to educate the population around this issue?
Oh, definitely. I think one example is the advertisements through various kinds of forms of advertisements in China. And the former basketball star Yao Ming has turned out into a strong force against the poaching of ivory products, killing of elephants for the tusks, and other forms of killing of animals on the verge of extinction. And I think his message is very clear. No trade, no demand, no buying and selling of ivory products in China and elsewhere. And this has really heightened the level of awareness among the general public in China about what is considered right or wrong in terms of the right thing of protecting these animals, but the wrong thing of killing these animals for their tusks. And this is also going on as we speak. In major cities in China, you actually see such advertisements run by people like Yao Ming quite often. And I hope this will spread and gather more momentum in China, so people will know for sure that it is wrong to kill elephants for the tusks and to buy and sell ivory products.
Dr. Murudi, you did talk about a Pan-African agenda there, though, and if you can just expound for us on that Pan-African agenda and that Pan-African approach, and as well in terms of the strategies that have been working for countries across the board, are they bearing any fruit?
Yes, I think there is an African-wide, elephant action plan, and being supported by the individual countries. It's an action plan that is agreed, for example, there is an elephant conservation fund, and each country has the obligation to conserve its elephants. The range states come together and came up with this agreement. So we would urge them to continue operating together and not to be divided by the crisis at this time. The countries that have high elephant numbers are to be commended, and I think there shouldn't be any mistake about that. They have done a good job, and what the conservation community is asking them is to take a sacrifice at the moment for the sake of the species. Having said that, I think it is unfair for us not to also say the cost to be borne by these countries to conserve elephants and other wildlife has to be shared with the international community. I think it would be unfair to say, you know, you did a good job, you can't sell your ivory, and you are not going to be helped to meet the cost. So I would also make the appeal to the international community to come to the help and the assistance of these countries that have done a good job. There are many strategies which have worked. Certainly, we must protect the habitat. We must work with the local communities, for example, to make sure that they earn their livelihoods from wildlife. Wildlife has a place in the sustainable development of Africa, and this has to start from the local level. Right. Protection of the species themselves is very important. Otherwise, you cannot talk about benefits or even selling if the species has gone extinct. So that is very important. And then we have to really make sure that our countries are not being trafficking routes, and then stop the demand, as you know, my colleague from China talked about. And as we talk about that international approach and the international assistance, Victor Gaudo, China last year made a commitment to promote wildlife protection in Africa. Let's talk about that commitment. What is that commitment from China?
Well, first of all, I would say that to protect these wild animals, many of which are on the verge of extinction, would definitely require a close international cooperation. No single country can do all the job or bear all the cost. China has declared that no single individual or institution or company should be engaged in this kind of trade in China. So I would say from the Chinese perspective, we want to encourage a whole range of international cooperation, ranging from the very beginning, where the source is, to the very end of the whole process, where the trading, the buying and selling of the finished processed ivory products are involved. And all the countries need to pitch in, and China is ready to contribute money and thinking, for example, and technical know-how to the African countries to enable them to do their part of the job in Africa. But more importantly, China really need to tighten up whatever the government here, the people here, the society at large here in China need to do, so that we no longer generate any demand for these illegally smuggled in ivory products into China.
Right. I want to get a comment from both of you on the alternative sustainable approaches, because going forward, of course, we have been talking about poaching and you know, decimation of wildlife for quite a while now, and stopping global ivory trade. What are some of the alternative approaches that could make this a reality? Victor first.
Well, I would say that since elephants roam a great range and they need a very large space to live by, encouraging tourism is a good thing, so that more and more people can go to these places to witness the greatness of these animals in natural environment, to get educated about these wild animals. That's one thing. And then the local communities can also earn lots of money from developing these tourist industry and create jobs. Hopefully this will help the local people, at least, to become more aware and more experienced in taking care of these wild animals. Secondly, I think law enforcement really need to be beefed up in these countries where the animals do live, and to make sure that the illegal poaching can really be effectively stemmed and completely outlawed. And then they need better equipment, sometimes helicopters to roam around to make sure that no one is violating the law by killing these wonderful animals. And I think the law enforcement in terms of customs and border control, for example, in these countries, all need to be beefed up so there will be enough deterrence so that the criminals will no longer even dare to go in that wrong direction of killing these wonderful animals and try to smuggle the ivory products out of the country into the international illegal market. And I think this is absolutely necessary, and countries like China and other more developed countries probably should all pitch in to contribute money, expertise, equipment, resources, etc. So the countries in Africa where these animals do live will receive more resources to beef up whatever they need to do in the first place.
Right. Dr. Murudi, to you.
Yes, I think I agree with what all that Victor says. I would like to add also the involvement of local communities in terms of being able to provide not only the land on which these animals roam beyond the protected areas, but also to be participants. In many countries, increasingly, we are having community conservancies or community conservation areas. This should be part of the land use and part of the livelihoods for these people to diversify on their other activities, such as, pastoralism in East Africa, or even limited agriculture under well-planned land use planning and implementation. So starting from the ground, communities getting involved, not just as recipients, but also as active participants given rights and able to participate in tourism ventures and other sources of wildlife conservation. Then international cooperation is very important, just to add on to what Victor was saying. The crime that is poaching and wildlife trafficking is transboundary, and we need cooperation, enhanced cooperation between African countries and then beyond. Emerging markets in Africa should be dealt with. This is not just about markets in Asia or in Europe or in America. There are some markets we know in Africa, and this should be addressed. So I think with all these measures, the species will have a future.
Right, Dr. Philip Murudi, we'll leave it there for the moment, and that's all we have time for this week on Talk Africa. To my guests, thank you for your insights. In Johannesburg, Dr. Philip Murudi, he's the Vice President for Species Protection at the Africa Wildlife Foundation. And in Beijing, current affairs commentator Victor Gao, thank you for joining us on the program. And remember, you can join the conversation at home through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more on Talk Africa. Goodbye.